So my name is Asad Tarsin, and I have been given the slightly daunting task of talking about a brief introduction to Islam. Can you guys hear me okay? Is this mic sort of set up okay? In about 15 to 20 minutes or so. So pretty difficult. So 14th century tradition, currently 1.6 billion Muslims, second largest religion, etc. But I'm going to try to give you sort of a bird's eye view that won't be too detailed, but you'll get sort of the bigger picture, so to speak. To borrow an analogy from one of my teachers, to at least know what the box top of the puzzle is supposed to look like in the end, right? Even if we may not get down to all the pieces. So we'll begin. So I want to start off with some definitions. People tend to have questions in the beginning. So I want to talk about two terms, Islam and Muslim. So Islam is the proper name of the religion itself. So sometimes it's easy for a Christian in Christianity, you just sort of put an I-A-N or an I-T-Y at the end, and it's easier. For Islam, Islam is the name of the proper religion itself. It's an Arabic term, a Semitic word, that means to turn oneself over to surrender, to submit, to resign oneself over to, obviously meaning the will of God. And it also is a cognate of a term that means peace or wholeness. The implication being that once you resign yourself over to God, that you attain a type of inward peace and serenity as well. A Muslim is one who performs the act of this surrender. So it's one who submits, and it's the term used for an adherent of the religion. So I'm a Muslim, and I follow the religion of Islam. And it doesn't obviously refer to a person of a particular race or ethnicity. It's the most populous Muslim country in the world is not an Arab country, it's Indonesia. Some of you might know that. And so I used, obviously, within the last year, we lost our great American Muslim hero, Muhammad Ali. So they can be of any, size, shape, color, and they can be really good at boxing sometimes too. So how does Islam view itself vis-a-vis other religions? One of the important things to note is that Islam sees itself as a culmination, a completion of a broader project which all of the other world religions contributed to. So it doesn't see itself, and this is very important, and I think sometimes Muslims tend to forget this because it's easy to be team religion, right? Your own religion. But it sees itself as completing something that could not have been completed without these previous religions. The Prophet Muhammad has a very famous tradition in which he says, the parable of my coming is like a beautiful building or house where people are walking around and saying, wow, what a beautiful structure, what a beautiful building, except it's missing one brick right there. And he says, and I am that last brick. Meaning this is something that I didn't build all alone, but this is something that's been built over the centuries. So it sees itself as a completion and culmination. One thing that's helpful is that people will sometimes refer to, particularly in academic circles, Islam with the capital I and Islam with the lowercase I. And what do we mean by that? So what does Islam mean? Here's a test quiz already in the middle of the talk. What does Islam mean? To surrender, right? To surrender oneself over to God, to submit to God. So by that standard, have all of the prophets been in a state of submission to God? Yes. So in the Quranic sense, if you read the Muslim holy books, it will say that Moses was in a state of Islam, right? Noah was in, and those who followed him and came on the ark was in a state of Islam. They don't mean Islam, capital I, Islam, because that doesn't come until the final brick, right, 7th century. But everybody before that was still surrendering themselves over to God. So there is a broader sense of what it means to be in a state of Islam. And you will see, and for someone who doesn't understand this, it can get confusing. It'll say Abraham was indeed a Muslim. So it doesn't mean that Abraham was a follower of Prophet Muhammad who came afterwards and followed his religion, right? What it means is he was in a state of complete surrender to God, as this broader philosophy. So it's seen as a completion and a moderation of all of the other previous roads traveled by prophets. So to give a summary of the religion, I would like to share with you a famous tradition from Muslim scripture. Muslims have two main sources of their religion. One is the holy book, the Quran, and we'll talk about that in bits and pieces as the day goes on. But the second are the teachings and statements of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him himself. And one day, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was sitting, and he was sitting with his companions, and this is near the end of his life, just a couple of months before he passed. And the one narrating the story says, we were sitting with the Prophet, and there was a man who came, and his clothes were exceedingly white, and his hair was exceedingly black, and there was no signs of travel on him. Back then, if you had clean white clothes, you hadn't gone anywhere. You weren't like riding on a horse for days on end, and then you don't arrive into city looking that clean. And so it's very strange, because we know everybody in town, and here's this mysterious figure who we don't recognize, but he doesn't have any signs of travel on him. And he came and he sat next to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and he said, "Oh Muhammad, tell me what Islam is." And I'm not going to translate it to surrender or anything like that. But he asks him what Islam is. And the Prophet Muhammad tells him what are now famously called the 5 pillars of Islam. Who here has heard of that term, the 5 pillars of Islam? Okay. By the end of this, I'm hoping that you will know that a better summation of the religion is not the 5 pillars, but the 3 dimensions. Okay? So we're going to go into the first dimension of Islam. The first is a dimension of practice. And these are the 5 pillars of practice. Okay? So they are that one, pronounce the 2 testimonies of faith. Okay, so it is to testify that there is nothing worthy of worship save God, and that Muhammad is the final messenger of God. Anyone who says this and believes it is a Muslim. That's the first step. That's a first pillar of practice that everyone must do. The second is the 5 daily prayers. And this is the Prophet Muhammad's answer. He asks him, what is Islam? And he says, Islam is that you testify that there's nothing worthy of worship save God, right? Pure monotheism, which in the Muslim teaching is what all of God's prophets taught, was monotheism. There's only one God, worship Him, be good to your parents, don't kill, don't steal, right? Some of the stuff that we all know. But some of the other details differed, but they all taught belief in one God. Then the 5 daily prayers. And Muslims pray, depending on the position of the sun, at 5 different times during the day. The third is what's called a purifying charity, a zakat. For everybody who's above a poverty line, from your excess wealth, that you give 2.5% of your wealth in charity to those who are in need. So that's the third pillar of practice. Notice these are all actions that you do, right? So you testify. You actually stand up and you pray. You go out and you share your wealth with those who need it. The fourth is fasting the holy month of Ramadan. So in the Muslim calendar, it's a lunar calendar, similar to the Jewish tradition, etc. It's a lunar calendar. There's a lunar month called Ramadan. It happens once a year, where we fast from dawn, to sunset. That means no food, drink, or relations, right? So it's keeping the state, and that is the fourth pillar of practice. And the fifth is to make pilgrimage to the city of Mecca, to a structure called the Kaaba. And this was built by the patriarch Abraham and his son Ishmael. Built this as a house of worship for the one true God of Abraham. So these are the 5 pillars of practice, which are one out of the 3 dimensions. Okay? And so after the Prophet Muhammad says, what is Islam? And he lists these 5. This mysterious questioner says, yes, you are correct. And the one telling the story says, we were so shocked how he asks the question of the Prophet and then says, yes, you're correct. And then he says, fine, tell me about Iman. What is faith? Right? And the Prophet Muhammad lists the 6 main objects of faith. Faith is that you believe in God, and we believe in God in the sense of, right, an all-powerful creator of the heavens and the universe, right? Pure radical monotheism. The God that sent all of the previous prophets, Noah, Jesus, Abraham, Noah, right, Jacob, all these names that we're familiar with. This is God, that you have to believe in God. To believe in angels, right? We believe in angels, beings that are in another dimension, that still interact with us, but that's a matter of faith. We believe in Scripture, that you cannot be a Muslim without affirming the Torah, without affirming the Gospel of Jesus, without the Psalms, right? These are, and then we believe in parchments of Abraham. They may not, they might not exist in their current form. They may have been lost in bits and pieces, but you affirm that God sends a message to his people through scriptures, to his followers. And then we believe in messengers, that God selects people to communicate to mankind his wishes for them and what he desires of them. Now, I've listed a lot of names. Many of them are likely familiar to some of you, but you may have noticed that I listed Jesus as a prophet. And this is one distinction we have with the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition. In the Jewish tradition, he's not the Messiah. He's a radical rabbi, sometimes less respectful language than that. In the Muslim tradition, he is the Messiah. He is born of a virgin birth. He returns at the end of time, etc., etc. He is the Messiah, but we still hold him to be a created human prophet of God. That he is the Son of God figuratively and not literally. He's not incarnate, but he is a prophet. Whereas now you have, on the other side of it, you have the Christian tradition, and I'm not talking early Aryan Christianity, I'm talking about now modern mainstream Christianity, holds him to be, instead of the Son of God, God the Son. And I think that's another important distinction. In the Muslim tradition, we sort of go between rejecting him as not the Messiah or ascribing divinity to that. He is the Messiah, but a created prophet in the Muslim tradition who will return at the end of time and perform lots of miracles and things like that. The day of judgment, each of us will be resurrected and held accountable for everything we have done in life. Very scary thought. Fortunately, we have a merciful God. But that we believe in a day of judgment, that even if you get away with an injustice in this world, that there's a day of reckoning. And it is not with somebody who you can get, pull a fast one on. And the last is we believe in divine decree, that all things in this universe are in God's control and dominion. They all happen with his leave. And that nothing happens to us, good or bad, unless God allows it to happen. And so this is a source, it's an object of faith, but it's also a source of solace in that we know that if something happens to us, that it happened because God allowed it to. And that there must be a higher wisdom that we don't see, and that it's good for us spiritually. And one example of this, the famous Muslim mystic poet Rumi talks about an ant that's crawling along a fabulous Persian rug with its intricate pattern. And the ant walks along and says, "Oh, this is a green rug." And then it sees red suddenly. What is this? Well, red? Then it sees blue. Then it sees yellow. It says, "Whoa, what is this?" Well, all these random colors changing at times. Who made such an ugly rug? Because the ant cannot see the full rug that we can see. And he uses that as a metaphor that sometimes we have trials or tribulations in life, the wisdom of which doesn't become apparent to us much, much later. So that's, and after he answers with these 6 objects of faith, our mysterious visitor says what? "You have spoken correctly." And they are, again, surprised and confused. And then he asks a third question. He says, what is ihsan? Ihsan is a word in Arabic that literally means to make beautiful, right? To make beauty. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says he gives a short summation of what it means to be in that state. He says, it is to worship God as if you see him, and even if you cannot see him, to know that he sees you. So he talks about the spiritual state of awareness and purity and piety. And it comes from primarily a process of purification. That each of us is born with innate goodness, but an innate tendency towards more base desires. So each of us has a conscience, right? Each of us, if we're sort of healthy, right? People can undergo abuse and traumatic things where they lose this. But if we see someone hurt or in pain, it bothers us, right? If we see an animal tortured, right, we're bothered by it. And we know now, social sciences, people who torture animals at a young age grow up to have, sociopathic tendencies, right? That there's part of what it means to be human is to have that component. But at the same time, we all know we can be selfish and greedy, have anger. Why me? Why not me? I deserve that, etc. We have these tendencies to what we call in our tradition, diseases of the heart that have to be purified. And so in this process of purification, through following the teachings of the prophets, right, we find ways in which we elevate our character. We overcome our anger. And so when someone does something harmful to us, we meet them with patience and forgiveness. But you can't do that if you're in a state of rage and agitated. right? The other thing is that we have an understanding of what we call moderate asceticism. Most people don't even use the term asceticism anymore, right? In our day and age, consumerism, right? Asceticism, moderate asceticism is to be in the world but not of the world. Certain traditions, I have a monastic tradition, and I'm talking about this respectfully, this is where we differ, in which to flee from the world, you head for the hills and you just divorce yourself of all interaction with the world. Only a small percentage of people can actually do that. So how do the rest of us practice a type of asceticism? And it is to, in our world, have, as one scholar put it, to have money in your hand, but not in your heart. And this comes from spiritual work. And so once he says, the third time, that his definition, the mysterious traveler says what? You've spoken correctly. And the conversation continues, and this mysterious man leaves, and the Prophet Muhammad turns after the man has left, and he asks his companion, do you all know who that questioner was? And they said, no, we don't. Who is the questioner? And he said, that was the Archangel Gabriel. He came to teach you your religion. And this is why Muslims use this summation, right? It happens about, some say 30 days before the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This happens right at the end of his mission to say, this is the summation. Right belief, right? Right action. It's almost parts of the Eightfold Path of Buddha, right? If you hear some of this. Right belief, right action, and then attaining the spiritual state by getting rid of vices and acquiring virtues. Okay? And so this is the summation of the religion. It is a submission to God of the mind, body, and soul. What we believe, right? What we do with our body, and then of our soul. What we become. And this is the middle road in the Muslim understanding. It is to merge the great, rich legal tradition of rabbinical law with the great spiritual teachings of Jesus Christ. And that when you have this submission to God of your body and your spirit, right? We always talk about the law, right? The letter and the spirit of the law, to bring them and merge them together, knowing the superiority of the spirit over the letter, but combining them and living a life in conformity to that is what the middle road that you'll see a lot in the Quran. And this is what the Muslim tradition teaches us. So that is just a brief summary. The 3 dimensions. There's going to be a quiz later on, right? So it's practice, belief, and spirituality. And this is the summation of the religion of Islam. Thank you for your kind attention, and I'm going to turn it over to better speakers than I.
Thank you, Dr. Asad. Our next speaker is Sarah Kim. She's one of the founders of the Elm Tree Homeschooling Co-op, and she's also a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and she has a degree of civil engineering. And now she owns and runs a ranch named Sienna Ranch in Lafayette, and I think she has 7 children. It says 7 children for her and 6 children for her husband. So I'm going to go with 7. Is that right? Okay. So I'm going to turn the mic over to her.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Just one correction, I didn't graduate from the Naval Academy.
Oh,
yeah, I did attend the Naval Academy, but I left after 2 years. And actually that's in my talk, so I'll explain that a little bit more. So I just wanted to explain first how this panel became formed. We actually did our first talk together almost exactly 1 year ago in response to some of the horrific things that were being said about Muslims in the media. After a few days of feeling somewhat helpless after the San Bernardino tragedy, we decided we needed to do something, however small, to help balance the messages that people are receiving about Muslims and Islam, most of which are just plain false. So it's very important that I start by thanking you all for being here. We can assemble a panel of speakers all we want in an attempt to share the truths about who we are, but this would have no impact whatsoever if sincere people like yourselves didn't show up to hear us. I am honestly both honored and humbled to be sitting here before you today. And I'd like to believe that we're all here because we love our community and we love our country and our world. And when we seek to know, understand, and respect one another, we are able to elevate ourselves, our respective communities, and our beloved country to the highest levels. So the title of my talk is How Islam Made Me a Better American. But what does that really mean, to be an American? There are likely many definitions for this. However, I'm confident there are a set of ideals which resonate with most Americans. Compassion, integrity, mutual respect, kindness, generosity, equality. These are all qualities which I think good human beings, good Americans, strive to embody. What I would like to speak specifically about today is a topic that I can address with what I hope is a sincere and passionate heart, and this is the topic of racism. Growing up, I was very close to my paternal grandparents. I would spend summers in North Carolina with them, and since I was an early riser like my grandfather, we would enjoy a daily 7 a.m. breakfast at a restaurant nestled at the bottom of the mountain where he lived. I was proclaimed his favorite granddaughter, partially because I was named after his eldest daughter, Sarah Jo, who had passed away in a tragic car accident just the year before I was born. Apparently, I looked like Sarah Jo as well, so his affinity towards me was clear and understandable to all. In return, I deeply adored him. He was a generous man who showered love and affection on all of us grandchildren. The one thing, though, that I remember not knowing how to love about him was his deep-seated racism and hatred for people of color. He openly insulted and disrespected Black people. He frequently used the N-word. I remember being really uncomfortable with this attitude and his actions towards Blacks. So naturally, I exonerated myself from being racist. In hindsight, however, I realized that the post-civil rights era in the South was still rife with unspoken racism. Though there were African Americans in town and in school, we had very little to do with one another. I didn't have any Black friends. I didn't live near Black people. I didn't sit near Black people in class or at lunch. Basically, there was minimal to no interaction between them and us. Separate but equal may have been banished by law, but it was alive and well in everyday actions, including even in mine. In my mind, however, I was all American as apple pie, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed high school cheerleader. My European ancestors landed on American shores in the early days of settlement. My mother is part Native American. I'm 1/16 Native American. I lived in southern suburbia and was the daughter of a self-made businessman, attending some of the best public schools in the area, along with church on Sundays. I had my mind set squarely on attending a service academy after graduation, so who could possibly be more American than me? In 1996, I had completed a couple of years at the Naval Academy before deciding military life was not for me. I transferred to the University of Maryland to get my degree in civil engineering, married my husband Mike, and had our first son, Ben. Mike was still in the Navy and stationed in Japan, and I stayed in the States to finish my degree. And it was at this time that I was introduced to Islam. Since my talk is not about my conversion story, I won't go into much detail about how I chose to enter into this beautiful religion. But I do want to share with you how being Muslim completely altered my understanding of race. Before I do that, however, I think this would be an appropriate time to share a few of the Islamic teachings regarding race which came to us via the sayings of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or verses taken from the Holy Book, the Quran, which we believe to be the direct word of God, whom we call Allah in Arabic. As I share these with you, please keep in mind the opening line of the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, the document that formed the foundation of our nation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. In Islam, we are taught that righteousness is the only quality that makes someone virtuous in the sight of Allah, not race, or skin color, or lineage, or country. In his last and final public sermon to the Muslims over 1,400 years ago, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, very clearly addressed this topic of racism when he said, O people, your Lord is one, and your father Adam is one. There is no favoritism of an Arab over a foreigner, or a foreigner over an Arab, neither red skin over black skin, or black skin over red skin, except through righteousness. We were also taught by the Prophet Muhammad that God created Adam from handfuls of clay and dirt, collected from the different areas of the earth. So just as the dirt of the earth is different colors, we have black soil, white sands, and red clay, the children of Adam come in different colors as well. Finally, he taught us that there is no good in red skin or black skin, but that our value lies only in our righteousness and in our closeness to God. These are just some of the teachings of Islam that slowly began to permeate my life and to help me develop a deeper understanding of problems with racism. However, there was one crucial time in my life that these teachings really took hold of me and taught me the true essence of what it meant to be an American. My father, at the age of 50, was diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor and given 2 months to live. I wanted to take my young son, Ben, back home with me to South Carolina so that I could take care of my father in his final days. He readily agreed to have me come home, but firmly warned me against trying to convert him to my new religion. I had become Muslim only 3 months prior. I assured him I would do no such thing, and I headed to South Carolina. Interestingly enough, in a very short period of time, after quietly observing me in my worship and noting my newfound mindfulness that I brought to my day-to-day life, my father began questioning me about my new faith. Facing death, he was forced to think about his own mortality, so he started seeking answers to the questions of what might be coming after death and what had been the real purpose of his life. I tried to answer his questions to the best of my ability, but my own limited knowledge of my new religion could not satiate his deep curiosity. He peppered me with questions, and I literally ran out of answers. In desperation to provide him with what he was looking for, I searched for a local Muslim community where I might be able to take him so that he could speak to someone, anyone, who could give him the answers that I simply could not provide. I searched in the phone book, I asked around, nothing. I could find no Muslims anywhere close to us. Keep in mind, this was all happening in the time before the internet had claimed the presence that it enjoys today. I was desperate. For days and nights, I prayed to God. Though I didn't know everything about Islam, I did know one of the irrefutable tenets of the religion is that one of the conditions of prayer is that you have to submit and recognize that God can answer any prayer, anything that seems impossible. And answer it he did. One morning, my father stumbled across an ad in the local paper announcing the grand opening of an Islamic center in the next town. He eagerly showed it to me, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was truly a miracle. God had sent us some Muslims. That very next Saturday, we drove to Rock Hill, South Carolina, to meet these Muslims in the hopes that they could help my father settle the affairs of his soul. To my surprise, and honestly, to my disappointment, we saw that the entire group was comprised of African Americans. Not one other white person was in the room. My heart sank, certain that this was a mistake. Deep down, I knew that there was no way my father could be guided to a new belief system through a group of African Americans. It just wasn't possible. He had been conditioned all his life to spurn them. But another fact we are taught in Islam, God is greater. What you will often hear is Allahu Akbar. God is greater than the limitations we place upon ourselves and the limitations that we place upon others. For when my father emerged from that center, he was a man deeply moved by all those whom he had met. He was a man who received answers to the questions that had remained unanswered for so long. And he was now a man of the Muslim faith. God is truly greater than anything we can imagine. Through the words and the actions and the sincerity of those whom he had been groomed to hate, he had found acceptance, love, and a faith that he would embrace and practice as a means of drawing closer to his Creator until his death 1 year later. May God have mercy on him. This is something Muslims say about those who have passed, similar to when people say, God rest his soul, or may he rest in peace. The Black Muslim community in South Carolina took very good care of my dad and me. They would invite us to their homes every Friday after congregational prayers. My father would be with the men, and I would hang out with all of the women and children. The men became an unwavering web of support for my father, teaching him, guiding him, and helping him come to terms with his impending death. While I was comforted by and thrilled with the peace that my father had found, this was actually a momentous turning point for me as well. For the first time in my life, I had Black friends. They were more than friends to me, however. They were my sisters. We would pray together, sing together, eat together, and laugh together. It was a beautiful and memorable time in my life. It was a Friday in February, nearly 1 year after my dad's conversion to Islam, when he returned to his Lord. At the time of his passing, my 2-year-old son Ben, an African-American brother named Abdullah, and I were all sitting at his bedside. Anyway, this brother had come to visit my father so that he could read from the Holy Quran in his presence. Muslims believe that the recitation of the Quranic words in Arabic brings solace to the heart, and the specific reading of the chapter called Yasin helps to ease the soul's passing from this world to the next. It was through the lips of this Black man that these verses aided my father's soul. It was the brothers from this Black community who came to pick up his body. It was they who washed his head and his limbs, who perfumed him, who shrouded him, and who prepared him for his burial. They arranged for the funeral, transported his coffin to the cemetery, and lowered his body into the ground, and then prayed over him in accordance with the Islamic rituals of burial. There were rows and rows of Black men praying for my father's soul. If only my grandfather had been there to witness that tremendous and powerfully ironic scene. So that was the starting point from which all of my unrealized racism began to melt away. It was at this point that I became truly Muslim and truly American. I understood unequivocally the power of humanity without preconceived notions or discriminatory underpinnings. Upon moving to California, I have continued to be blessed with the most amazing friends and community members from all backgrounds, races, and religions. It is on this premise of mutual respect for all of God's creation that I have found a true kinship with all races and all people. I have been taught that to treat everyone with dignity and respect is an actual act of worship. And I have learned that one of the most famous teachings of the Prophet Muhammad is that to smile at someone is also an act of worship. Because of our faith, my life and my husband's life and my children's lives have been elevated. And I hope and pray that we always will be positive contributors to the greater society in which we live. I can surely say, with immense gratitude and humility, that I am a better human being and a better American for it. It is my sincerest wish that my children, along with all the children of our Muslim communities, will lead future generations of Americans based on the premise of God's command to get to know one another in peace and to create a life that uplifts all that is good and suppresses all that which is evil. It has been a pleasure to speak with you all today. Thank you so much for taking the time to get to know us and for honoring me by listening to my story. I sincerely pray that this afternoon is just the beginning of a wonderful new friendship, God willing.
Thanks, sister. Sorry, we call each other sister and brother, even though we're not sisters and brothers. Thanks, Sister Sarah. We're going to move on to Sister Hina Khan-Mukhtar. She is a mother of 3 boys and also one of the co-founders of the Elm Tree Homeschooling Co-op. And she's also very active in interfaith dialogue. And she's going to be addressing some common misconceptions in Islam.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to start out by letting everyone know that I've actually been really sick this whole week. I've missed a couple of days of work, and I've been praying to be able to make it to my speaking engagements today and tomorrow. So this is the first time I'm going to try to say more than a few sentences without coughing, so forgive me if I have to take some breaks. But like Sister Aisha mentioned, I have been blessed to be involved in interfaith work. I get to, I'm part of an initiative called the Neighbor to Neighbor Initiative, which was started by the Lafayette Orinda Presbyterian Church and Temple Isaiah in Lafayette. And together we have been meeting in churches and temples and mosques to talk about our different faiths, talk about our commonalities, and also find out how we can be coming together to support one another in different times. And also take part in each other's celebrations. It's been a really beautiful experience. And one thing I've learned from these different panel discussions and different visits to churches and temples is that I've noticed a lot of the same questions keep getting asked. I guess we could call them our FAQs, the frequently asked questions that come up. And so those were the questions I wanted to try and cover today in case anybody here has similar questions. So the first one I get asked about is, what is Sharia? And is it coming to take over America? There's a lot of fear associated around the word Sharia, which is really ironic because if you ask Muslims, Sharia is really just an important part of our lives. Like Dr. Asad was talking about faith, conduct, and character, right? What Muslims believe, what Muslims do, and what Muslims aspire to be. Sharia encompasses what we do and how we do it. So people on the street may be thinking automatically about, they may equate it with penal code punishments like stonings or cutting off the hand if somebody steals or capital punishment. Whereas the everyday Muslim associates it with really like, can I eat that? And at what time am I supposed to be performing my afternoon prayer? And how do I make my will? How do I divide up my inheritance? What are the rules of marriage? What are the rules of divorce? That is what Sharia is for us. Sharia gets, the Arabic word actually means a path to a body of water. And if you ask yourselves, what does a body of water do in the middle of a desert? It's a place that's where people go to refresh themselves, to get guidance, to get their strength before they move on to the next step of their journey. So Sharia for us is guideposts about how to live our lives. And like I mentioned with capital punishment, for example, what we really should understand is that these punishments that people think is Sharia law is actually meant to be a deterrent. It's not really meant to be implemented. And sometimes we see some terrible images in the news of what's happening in different parts of the world, like stonings, which this is vigilante justice. This is not anything that any Muslim scholar worth his salt or her salt would tell you was legitimate. And Muslims are just as horrified, and Muslims are often the victims of this kind of vigilante justice. But just the same, like we have capital punishment in America, that doesn't mean that if John Q. Citizen knows that somebody else killed someone, that they are then allowed to go and shoot the person in the head because capital punishment is allowed in America. We have a system here of trials and courts. And these kinds of penal code punishments now are not even implemented because there is no real, there's no real just system in the world the way Muslims are looking at it. So many Muslim scholars say there's actually a moratorium now on these kinds of punishments. But unfortunately, it's some of the most atrocious acts that get the headlines, and people assume that that's how it must be for average Muslims, when average Muslims are just as baffled by what you're seeing in some of the news stories. Sharia can also be compared to the kosher laws that you see amongst the Jews, so the rabbinical laws about what kind of meat we eat and what are our dietary laws. So if you wanted to know a fair comparison. Also, the basis of Sharia, which is really interesting when I learned about it, is that it really is meant to protect 6 different things. anything that you see in Sharia that's a law, it's going to be protecting one of these 6 things. Your religion, your life, your intellect, so that would explain like why alcohol is forbidden according to Sharia for Muslims, because it affects the intellect, your property, which is why we're not allowed to steal, your family, your lineage, that comes under 1, so that we have the right to know who we're related to, where our ancestry comes from, and our honor. So we're not allowed to slander one another. We're not allowed to tell lies about people and try to spy on one another and figure out, what people's hidden secrets are. That's actually against Sharia. So these are the 6 different things that Sharia comes to protect. All right. Another question I get asked about is jihad. And what is it, and do we believe in it? Jihad is actually a very, very noble concept in Islam, and it's such a noble concept, in fact, that people will actually name their sons jihad. And I know of a young man who was unable to get a personalized license plate for his car because, unfortunately, the word's been co-opted and people assume that it's a negative term. There's a military aspect to it, but jihad actually means to struggle against your base desires, to struggle for something greater. A jihad for somebody could be to give up smoking cigarettes. A person's jihad could be to stop telling lies. A person's jihad could be to not reach for that 3rd chocolate chip cookie. So every one of us has a different jihad in our life that we're struggling with. But unfortunately, many people assume that jihad only means the military aspect of it. We would even say that the American military here, if they're protecting their borders, they're engaged in jihad, meaning they're engaged in a struggle to make sure that that the citizens are safe. Okay, another question I get asked about is hijab, so the headscarf. And in my interfaith work, I really enjoy going to Catholic churches because there's so much iconography there of the Virgin Mary, and I always feel really at home there because I'm like, okay, I feel like she would get me sitting here with my head covered. So many people assume that hijab must be something that women not choose to do, actually that women do because a husband or a brother or a father or a son, somebody is telling them that they have to cover their heads, which for most Muslim women that I know personally in my life, that's not the case. Many of us came to this decision on our own. I decided to put on the hijab at the age of 28 after I started taking classes to learn more about my religion. And at the time, my husband actually wasn't very comfortable with the idea of me wearing the hijab because, as he put it at the time, he said, I'm a private person, I'm not somebody who likes to go out and advertise what religion I follow, and if you're going to be wearing the headscarf, then every time we're together, people are going to know what religion we follow. And so I had to tell him, well, actually, this really doesn't have to do with you. This has to do with me. And this is a decision I'm making for myself because I believe that it's an act of sincerity and it's an act of worship, and it's something that I hope that God will reward me for, because it's not necessarily easy, but it's something that I do out of my sincerity for Him, and because I want to be like the pious women that I've learned about, first and foremost like the Virgin Mary. So I can only hope to be. This is just one aspect of it. Unfortunately, we get focused on the outward, but I always joke that, okay, fine, I put a hijab on my head, but how do I actually put one on my personality? And by that, I don't mean that I have to be quiet or shy or there's anything wrong with me being out there, but more about like how do I inculcate inner modesty? Like how do I make myself somebody who doesn't want to be all about being praised, all about me, all about having the spotlight on me. So that's another aspect of hijab. And unfortunately, people only see the part of it which is about covering the hair. But it's a lot deeper than that. Another question I get asked about are the Shia-Sunni differences. People ask that, why are Shias and Sunnis killing each other? Why do Shias and Sunnis hate each other? All I know is, from my experience as an everyday Muslim, is my mother's best friend was Shia, and I grew up with loving Shias, and Shias were my really good friends. We went to each other's mosques and were there for one another. The difference between Shias and Sunnis has really been more of a political split. It happened after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when there was debate, and I'm going to really just dumb this down because I myself don't understand all the finer details of it, but there was a disagreement about who should be leading the Muslim community after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So the Sunnis believed that it should be the best person for the job, and the Shias believed that it should be somebody related to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that it should be someone from his family. And so that's where the split happened in the community. But what we're seeing in the world today, right now, in different parts of the world where there's fighting between Shias and Sunnis, that's got more to do with the geopolitical realities on the ground than it's got to do with actual Shia and Sunni differences. It would be kind of like my saying that my only understanding of Catholics and Protestants is what was happening in Ireland in the 1980s. That's the violence that was happening in Ireland in the 1980s is not a correct summation of the Catholic tradition or the Protestant tradition, but that's what was happening on the ground with politics at the time. And then the last one is the question about Islam being spread by the sword. That was Islam spread by the sword. Well, historically, what we'll learn in the history books is that actually Islam was spread more by tradesmen. It was spread more by people going into different countries and communities to engage in trade and business and learning from one another. And to me, really, it's about the proof is in the pudding, like looking at the historical record. If we look at the world today, you will still see communities of Yemeni Jews in Yemen, Christians in Iraq, Zoroastrians in Iran, in Persia. We've got communities of Moroccan Jews. We've got the Druze in Lebanon. We've got Syrian Christians. And in today's time, the fact that we've got ISIS persecuting Christians and destroying their churches in Iraq, that shows that these communities have been around for centuries. The fact that they're there to be persecuted now. And my fear is that the historical record will be forgotten and that in another generation, people will believe that Muslims persecute Christians or hate Christians because memories can be short. Islam was in Syria actually for almost 3 centuries, and the population of Muslims hadn't even reached 50%. But then at the same time, it behooves us to ask, where are the Muslims in Spain? Muslims were in Spain for 7 centuries, 700 years, and they were kicked out along with the Jews. And so, during the Spanish Inquisition. And one of the stories that I feel really sums up how different faiths can get along in peace is when the Caliph Omar visited the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, in Palestine. He entered the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and he was, I'm probably mispronouncing that, by the way. Sepulchre? Sorry. So he visited the church, and it was suggested, or he was invited to say a prayer, to pray in the church, and he actually refused because he said that his fear was that if he prayed in the church, that coming generations of Muslims would turn the church into a mosque because he prayed there. And so out of respect for that, he said, I'd rather not, out of respect for the church. And to this day, 2017, it's a Muslim family that holds the keys to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I've got some Arabic terms you guys are going to have to say after this. And so yeah, I don't want to take up too much time, but hopefully through Q&As we'll be able to have more of a discussion. But these are pretty much the top 5 questions that I get asked. So see if there's anything more afterwards.
Thank you, Sister Hannah. So that reminds me again, write down your questions. After Brother Mike goes, we're going to have a quick 5-minute break so we can look through the questions and figure out what we're going to be able to answer in our short amount of time that we have. Okay. Brother Mike Kim is the Chief Investment Officer at a private real estate development and investment firm in San Francisco. And he's also a graduate of the United States Naval Academy. And he has served the nation as a naval officer, leading maritime missions and expeditions in Asia, Europe, Middle East, Central and South America. And I'm going to turn the mic over to him. He's going to be discussing American naval officer addresses jihad and war in Islam.
Hi guys, can everybody stand for a minute, just kind of stretch out and say for a while. Yeah, there you go. Get the juices flowing. So, usually these things go where they save the best for last, but I'm not the best for the last here, so I beg your indulgence and your patience. I'll try to be brief. So the subject that I was asked to speak is interrelated to how I came to Islam, so I wanted to frame it by touching upon that. And maybe the best place to start is when I was a freshman at the Naval Academy. We were given this assignment to go and write up a short biography of all the eminent materialist scientists and mathematicians of the eras. And I was in the library dozing off, flipping through books, and then I came across this passage that just jumped out at me. And it basically said that these material scientists and mathematicians that we studied and revere so much were all believers in a transcendental or a universal, which is an academic terminology for a God, a created universe. And I thought, my gosh, nobody told me that when René Descartes was studying the Cartesian coordinates, he was trying to understand the geometric creation of God. When Isaac Newton talked about the mover cannot be the moved, he was talking about the distinction between the creator and the physical effects of it, so on and so forth. So light bulbs just kept popping off. And so I came to a quick realization that it would behoove me to, look into the subject matter, because these people are brilliant people, and I'll never hold a candle to them, and I want to benefit from their wisdom and knowledge. So it launched me on a path of really trying to understand this concept of a created universe, if you will. And through, I abandoned pretty much the curriculum of the Naval Academy, and I spent a lot of time reading the great books and debating liberal arts college students, and handily got my chops knocked here and there, but I did the best I can. And over the course of that inquiry, which is predominantly academic, I walked away with a pocket full of questions and some conclusions. And some of the conclusion that I came to was that there was indeed a God. It was a created universe, and this God was one because of the harmony of the universe, etc. And that heavenly matters, that God matters, superseded all humanly matters. That was my only two conclusions from my academic inquiry. And then from there, we're just kind of window shopping to figure out what system of belief am I going to adopt, right? So I went down the line, and of course, Islam was the one I did not want to do, because they're terrorists, they're warmongers, they do all this evil stuff. Like you, I was subject at the time to the consuming mass media and not getting the truth of things. So I had all this pent-up hatred and dislike for everything Islam, Muslim, whatever, those people, But make a long story short, the time came when I kind of ran out of religions to look into, because they weren't answering my questions, right? I mean, for example, one standard was, it was important to me that scientific discovery lagged behind revelation. Because after all, if we're talking about the creator of the universe, your revelation as presented by the prophets should be ahead of scientific discovery. In fact, scientific discovery should only go towards supporting and proving out revelation. And that's one standard I found that many of the religions had struggled with. And I had those types of standards, if you will, for whether it's economic, social, scientific, military, etc. And Islam basically answered them all with no fanfare. It was like nothing for Islam. It said, this is how it is, here's the proof, here's the evidence, there's the concept, there you go. So it was jarring, frankly, because I thought I had this pocket full of intellectual sort of but Islam really was basic math for them. It was Islam 101 that addressed my concerns. So there you go. So I came to a crossroad and I had to take the path traveled by 1.6 billion people. And by the way, I just want to mention that it dawned upon me at some point that it's really like a casual moment of logic. That if you're going to have 1/4 of the human race that follow this religion of Islam, there must be something good in it, right? I mean, 1 to 4 human beings, if they're rotten, I mean, we are in big trouble. So anyways, through my course of inquiry, because I was an American naval officer, we spent a lot of time at, as they do at West Point and Air Force Academy, at Annapolis, same thing, we spent a lot of time understanding the conduct of war. Because we know that warfare is the worst human endeavor. If not done with principle, rules, you can lose your humanity in warfare. So therefore, you have to have a system of belief and a system of engagement that forces us to act honorably and with as much discipline as possible, with the hopes that we walk away from the battlefield with our humanity intact. Right? It's because, for example, when a lion brutally destroys that cute little doe, we don't impose morality upon the lion, right? It just does what it does. That's what the lions do. We human beings are given reason, other intellectual faculties that elevates us above the animal kingdom. So we had to preserve that, right? And in the context of warfare, you're engaged in the most base activity as human beings can. So if you cannot act honorably, then you run the risk of walking away damaged. So the American tradition, the 3 primary sources of how to conduct yourself in a war comes from conventions and treaties, some of which I'm sure you've heard, like the Geneva Convention, the Hague Non-Proliferation Treaty. Also traditions and customs like laws of the seas, which are traditions and customs that have been adopted and agreed upon by the community of nations. And domestic laws like no torture laws, right? So those things then trickle down to our actual conduct during warfare. So we're given orders on how do we conduct ourselves during time of the war, for the sake of maintaining our humanity, really, and making sure that we get the job done. So when I studied it at the Naval Academy, I thought, that's pretty good stuff. I mean, that's a pretty high bar, I think, we'll do well as a nation, so long as we follow these rules. But then I came across the Islamic or the Muslim version of conduct of war, and it surpassed everything that I've learned in the past. And I'll just share with you one narrow slice of it. There's a whole body of how to treat prisoners of war and all that stuff, but just one sort of a crisp picture. So this was Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, peace be upon him, his guidance to his troops before entering war. He gave them 10 simple rules. He said, do not kill any child, women, elderly, or sick person. Number 2, do not practice treachery or mutilation. Number 3, do not uproot or burn trees. Number 4, do not slaughter livestock unless need for food. Number 5, do not strike the face, for God created him in the image of Adam. Number 6, do not kill monks in monasteries, and do not kill those sitting in places of worship. He meant any places of worship, whether it's Buddhism or synagogues, whatever. 7, do not destroy villages and towns, and do not spoil cultivated fields and gardens. Meaning, don't destroy any infrastructure at all. Do not wish for battle. Pray to God for security, but if you are forced to take up arms, exercise patience. And what is meant by that, tangibly, is you can only fight that individual fighting you actively. The moment he stops, you must stop. Number 9, no one may punish by fire, which means like napalm, nuclear weapons. Those are all prohibited in Islam. And number 10, accustom yourself to do good, even if they commit evil. So there you have it. That's a pretty high bar. And if you can do these things, you can walk away from the battlefield with your humanity intact. And I think the fact that we see otherwise, whether Muslims or Western powers in the field of battle, is not to fault religion or the nation, but it's to rather fault the circumstance or the people involved in it. So I think it's an important distinction that we have to make. For example, our country, we don't have a very great record in recent past where, we have what was called the law of proportionality, right? It's an important concept where our military response is proportional to the act done upon us. But, if you were to take 9/11, that's 3,000 innocent souls taken. But our response has been brutal relative to it. By most conservative counts, the numbers are in excess of, it's in the millions. So, and the list goes on. So we have issues on all over the place. Us, them, everybody. So the important point is that let's not fault the nation or the religion, because that's not what's at fault. What's at fault is people and our conduct in the moment. And I think we need to make that distinction. That's it. That's all I got.
Thank you, Brother Mike. So if you could write down your questions, and if you have any feedback, go ahead and write that down too. Just mark it as feedback. So when we're looking for questions in our short period or short break, we will know to differentiate that. And there's tea in the same area where we were eating. 5 to 10 minute break, and then we're gonna, as soon as we're ready.
Cards on the way out.
There's also cards. If you didn't get a card, there's cards on the way out.
Raise your hands. The sister has the card if you don't have one.
Okay. And also, feel free to ask any questions that you think are uncomfortable questions. We will do our best to answer them, but in the interest of time, we're not gonna be able to answer every single question, but we'll try to do what we can. Thank you.
Questions? We are continuing the conversation with our next talk, which is, you can grab a flyer on your way out. It's going to be on March 4th. It's going to be Islam 101, which is going to be a continuation of this. You will come set the agenda. You come, ask what, it's going to be unlike us kind of getting up here and talking. You say what you want to talk about, Islamic related. And it's a attendee-driven discussion. And any question is open, any question at all. Is Islam a sexist book? Is it a war manual for violence? Ask it. Don't be fearful about asking anything. So we just want to get the questions out there, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much for coming. I'll pass it back to Sister Edlyn. Thank you. Aisha, excuse me.
So I'm a convert, so that's why some people are calling me Edlyn and some people are calling me Aisha. It's just when I converted, I got an extra name. So I have to be honest with you, going through those questions was a little bit depressing. There's a lot of misconceptions, and I don't want to cry here, but it's very upsetting to see what a negative perception there is of Islam. But I hope we will be able to clarify those questions. There's a lot of ISIS-related questions. I know that was on the agenda. The person who was supposed to be speaking on that was not able to make it today, and I think things got printed before we were able to change that on the agenda. So we're going to try to address the ISIS questions as much as we can. In the interest of time, we will have to, get to other questions also. And I want to encourage all of you, if you still have questions, and this is not to proselytize or proselytize. I think we just, judging by the questions, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So if you are interested, there's the March 4th talk by the same speaker who was supposed to be addressing ISIS. He's doing this Islam 101 talk. So you guys are more than welcome. It actually says questions are encouraged and everyone is most welcome. So please bring your friends. And I actually have given all the questions to them, so they're going to read the question and answer them. But I would like to thank you all for the feedback, and even though some questions made me feel like crying, the feedback or the question of, can you publish your recipe for chicken biryani on your Facebook page? That brought a smile to my face, and I appreciate that, whoever wrote that one. Thank you. Can you guys just take turns?
Yeah. So I am going to, and I know it's already 2:30, I'm going to ask everyone for 5 minutes of a monologue here. And the reason is, do you guys see all of, let me just stack these up. These are all ISIS-related questions. I'm not exaggerating. So, in order to not make anyone feel like their question is not getting addressed, I'm going to ask for a couple of minutes of general spiel, and then rapid fire, yes or no, 2-second answers to each. Does that sound okay to everyone? If anybody has questions that were not addressed, 1, I apologize. 2, I'll make myself available for discussion questions. We're here for you guys. But this is clearly on people's minds, so I know it was supposed to be Q&A. It's going to be monologue followed by Q&A and rapid fire. So, ISIS is a political, religious, mad mix of things, and it's a multi-dimensional problem. I don't think anyone who says that religious misunderstanding doesn't play a role in them I don't think that person is looking at the whole picture. Their bad religion is playing a role in justifying what they can do to themselves, or what they do amongst themselves. But it is oversimplistic to not look at the broader socio-political, geopolitics, invasion of Iraq, the power vacuum, etc. ISIS was founded like, what, 4 or 5 years ago? I mean, it seems like 20 years to me, but, right? So I don't want to unpackage ISIS. I would rather talk about violent extremism vis-a-vis Islam. So I'm going to go a little generic, because there are people who can write PhD theses on the rise of ISIS and what happened with Iraqi generals, and great frontline documentaries that you can watch on this that would do a far better job than I. But religion of all sorts can be used to justify, and I'm using the term justify very specifically, almost any act. Okay? Islam, as we have just heard from Mike here, Islam is a religion that gives guidance on all aspects of life. It would be much easier if it would just talk about how you pray and reach God and all of these things, and it stayed silent about matters of warfare. Then any misconduct on the battlefield would not reflect on Islam. But Islam does give guidance, as Mike taught us, these 10 points about, yes, warfare is an inevitable part of the human experience, and when you do so, here are the limits so that you do not transgress. Okay? Now, that does provide fodder for people to twist and justify anything. But it did with Christianity, it did with Judaism, it's still doing so, unfortunately, in Myanmar with Buddhism, right, which, is a very peaceful religion otherwise. Why do we not see those crazy extremists as reflecting the religion? Because we know their religion. With Islam, it's an unknown. So when we see that, we get confused and say, wait, is that Islam? I don't know, because we don't know Islam. When a Christian bombs an abortion clinic, no Muslim thinks, oh my God, Christianity teaches to bomb abortion clinics? Because we know Christians, right? And that's why this exchange is so important. If you know Islam and Muslims, you will know that that's just a fringe group of people who are taking some verses, manipulating really young people who are angry at the world, right? Who knows what kind of trauma they've had, and they're justifying crazy and insane things. It's happened in the past. Unfortunately, it's going to happen again in the future. That's what religion does. That's what ideology does. I mean, we can look at Nazism was a secular, right? A secular ideology that made people feel justified in bringing about a better world to kill 6 million people, right? So this happens. That is not to say that it's specific to religion. So I'm going to go rapid fire now. Oh, one more thing. Have Muslims spoken up and condemned? I got to thank my good friend John, my new friend John, for this. Have Muslims condemned ISIS? Have you guys heard of Google? Use it. You will be blown away. Just Google, Muslims condemn ISIS. Whatever combination words you choose, you will be skimming for pages. Condemnation after condemnation. Unfortunately, like I was saying earlier, if I said, I think I want to kill all infidels and bomb the Bay Bridge, I'd be on CNN Tonight, I'd have a book deal, and I'd be a millionaire. Right? As long as I didn't act on it. If I just, this is what I preach, I would be rich. But if you condemn, it's usually to an empty room of 3 people, and it doesn't make headlines. It's not interesting. Right? In this ADD, rapid-fire social media world, you want something that's really going to be an attention grabber. So I'm going to go. I'm going to also summarize some of these questions because I've pre-read them. Why is what we see in the Middle East so radically different from what we see here? You have cultural differences, but you also really have a politically unstable situation. You have Syria in the midst of a civil war. You have the so-called Arab Spring. You have a lot of revolutions. You cannot look at that in a vacuum, right? It's known, social scientists have studied this, broad middle classes, stable societies are far more safe, there's less crime, etc. This is across the board. So violence has a very close relationship with poverty, with political instability, and with other types of violence in the area. There is also, quite simply put, cultural understandings of religion as well. This is a good question, and I'm glad somebody asked this. Basically, does the Quran teach that its followers can lie to unbelievers, dupe them, if I'm reading this correctly, dupe them and even kill them, and if they do so, they will be forgiven because they are unbelievers? Very good question. The reason why I say it's a good question is because this is widespread, okay? The simple answer is no. I wish that would be enough and everybody would just nod and say, oh, I believe him. But it's madness that we live in a time in which a Muslim is told about his own religion, no, that's not what you really believe, right? And the greatest way to undo that is to say, no, but they're allowed to lie. Like, you can't believe anything they say, right? Because they're allowed to lie. We are not allowed to lie under any circumstances. There are very detailed guidelines about Muslim and non-Muslim interaction. And they have to be based on peace, security, mutual respect. I mean, if we're talking about the Caliph Omar, who's you have to think of him, he's like one of the 12 disciples, right? And if he refused to pray in a church out of fear that this church will one day be taken over, there is clearly a respect of the other, okay? And so, at the end of the day, I really do believe that if you study history, you will see, Muslim empires rising and falling, this sultan, that sultan. But if you look at, there was that movie, that Kingdom of Heaven, right? About Saladin and King Richard and the different interactions. They were fighting, right? They were at war with one another, but they still maintained respect with one another and cordial interaction. Muslims have lived at peace with all of their neighbors and all of their non-Muslim citizens for centuries, right? Pre-World War I, these were not even questions or conversations, right? They really are. We're talking about ISIS, and somebody asked me how do I feel about ISIS. I said it's a combination of anger, frustration, resentment. I mean, they're all negative feelings. They're destroying civilization that was preserved for millennia under Muslim rule, right? And they're only able to destroy it now because they're stupid, first and foremost, but because somebody preserved it for that long. And this is because it's human history. It's not my history to destroy and choose, I don't like this history. It's not yours. It's humanity's, right? But these are a sick and twisted pathological group of people who have just have no morals whatsoever. How does ISIS justify itself for violence and murder? I think I've talked about that, using verses that talk about how to conduct oneself in defense. There's a verse, I see some people walking around with copies of the Quran. There's a chapter called The Pilgrimage, I believe chapter 22, I don't know, The Pilgrimage. There's a verse in there, and this is the verse where violent defense is first permitted in the Quran. It says, أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتَلُونَ. Sorry, I have to say the Arabic first, and then I can translate because I won't remember it otherwise. أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتَلُونَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا. Permission has been given to those who are fought to fight back because they've been oppressed. So they're being fought already. And for 13 years, God said, no, you must patiently endure. You cannot defend yourselves. Eventually it comes back, right? The ones who were kicked out, sorry, I've got to do that. The ones who were expelled from their homes for no other reason than saying they believe in God. Now this is the part I want you to pay attention to here. Because here is where God tells us why and when violence can be appropriate. Okay? Because had God not repelled some aggressors by means of others, meaning if there weren't good people to fight back against bad people, right, to oversimplify it in really in elementary terms, then there would be no safety for churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples where God's name could be praised. Doesn't say Islam, doesn't say mosque only. Literally, go look it up. Churches, synagogues, temples. That covers, it's about religious freedom, right? The only time is either self-defense or ensuring religious freedom. And that's in our First Amendment also the same thing. So violence has a place, but it can obviously be abused. Oh man, some really good questions. I'm trying to sort some of these out. These are ISIS related, the only reason I'm skipping over them. Was President Obama naive to not brand violent jihadists, to brand violent jihadists as not Muslim, considering some of the other things, and then talk about what a kafir is? I don't want to get into politics. Islam doesn't have a political position on things, right? Islam doesn't make you either liberal or conservative per se, right? As certain things, I want to, like, where do us in the middle sometimes fit, right? There's some things that Muslims would tend to agree with on one side versus the other. Whether or not to call them Muslim is more of a political question. Are they Muslim? I think it's enough to say that they claim to be Muslim is enough of a problem in and of itself. That they call themselves Muslims has caused the Muslims to respond to them. And I encourage everybody to go to www, you guys aren't writing this down, www.lettertobaghdadi.com. You know, Baghdadi is the name, I hope none of you know who he is because it's not worth knowing. He is the leader of ISIS. So this is a letter written by 200 plus of the top Muslim scholars in the world refuting Baghdadi from a Muslim perspective. So yeah, they claim to be Muslim. It's enough of a reason to say, well then, you are absolutely not following the teachings in any way, shape, or form.
How do you spell that?
Yeah, letter to, T-O, it's the word to, not the number. And then B-A-G-H-D-A-D-I. Like Baghdad, the city, with an I at the end. Letter to Baghdad, I. And I've covered this, why don't Muslims speak out more? I would say, why doesn't the media cover us when we are speaking? So I think I've covered them for the most part. What I will say is, Muslims aren't lying to you when they say, this is not our religion. I think we have to be very honest about what Islam is and isn't. And I think we have to empower those who speak for their religion and not sort of paternalistically tell them, wait, no, you're not really telling us the truth about your religion. I read your book and it says this. It has never been understood that way for 14 centuries, right? And it takes an invasion of Iraq, the fall of Saddam, huge power vacuum, all of these generals. I mean, there's a lot to it to create a phenomenon like ISIS. Bad religion is one ingredient in a recipe, right? It is a necessary but not sufficient cause, to use legal terms. Muslims have been speaking out. Muslims are disgusted by it. Muslims are by far and large the victims of these atrocities. There is a city in the Midwest, I don't remember which state, I want to say it's in Iowa, called Kader, K-A-D-E-R. And it's named after a great Muslim hero, Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, right? So it's the anglicization of his name. And he was a man, I would encourage everybody to look up his story. So he was an Algerian fighting the French occupation. So he was engaged in the Muslim understanding of jihad, that if you have a foreign invasion, you can defend your borders, like any of us would do. If we, Pearl Harbor, right, any kind of foreign invasion, we're going to defend our borders. And he did that for so many years until it was futile, the French had won, and he retired, so to speak. And he left, and he eventually moved to Syria, where he was living. I'll make a long story really short, I promise. And one day, there starts to become this fight that breaks out in the city. It leads to angry mobs, and one of the culprits was a Christian. And so there was a group of Christians that this Muslim mob wanted to beat and kill and punish, sort of, this mass punishment for one person's thing. And Abdul Qadir, now moving to Syria, having retired, so you think of the samurai who hangs up his sword, says, I'm not touching that again. He calls all his men, and he says, I'm going to call you to a jihad just as noble as the one we fought in Algeria. Who is going to be with me? And they said, we're here with you till the end. He said, there are Christians now that some ignorant fools want to harm. He brought them into his house, and they stood in front of them and said, if anybody wants to fight these Christians, they have to come through us. Right? And these people, they stood and they fought the Muslim mob, and they said, this is a jihad more noble than the one that we were fighting. Right? So we don't see movies made about that, right? We don't hear the stories about that. But again, some people know history, and there's a city, like I said, named after him. But jihad is about a really sort of, you guys might laugh at this. A great analogy I think of is Jedi and Sith, right? It works. Not everybody with a lightsaber is a Jedi, right? Not everybody's there to defend good. We don't believe violence is bad in all situations. We believe in Jedi. Sometimes the weak need to be defended. But If somebody says, oh, I'm allowed to defend the weak, therefore I can start chopping off heads of everybody who upsets me, you're just a Sith, right? And there's that great line that Obi-Wan says, only the Sith speak in absolutes, right? And that's what ISIS does. They constantly speak in these binary terms. One last thing, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm sorry. There was a stack of questions where I was like, oh, this is the elephant in the room as we advertise. What is an infidel, a Catholic? And what does it mean to a Muslim? How many have heard that term, infidel? Okay. One of the things that's really shocking to me about it is it's said with this kind of like contempt on the tongue. This infidel, like it's a dirty word. In Muslim tradition, it just simply means somebody who chooses to not believe. And it's not seen as a negative thing where that person is now allowed to be mistreated. What it applies to is certain Muslim law. For example, if, and this same thing exists in other faith traditions. If a person is a Muslim and, I don't know, their brother is not, and that person dies, can he take his inheritance, for example? You get into like inheritance law, marital law, things like that. You know, like in the Catholic Church, you can't marry under certain conditions, etc. In the Jewish tradition, to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. It's along these lines. If somebody is a non-Muslim, they are afforded, in certain ways, greater respect and rights in Muslim societies traditionally than Muslims were. Because there was a term that was used for non-Muslim, and it wasn't kafir, it wasn't infidel, it was dhimmi. It means protected community. Because the Prophet Muhammad stood up one day and he said, anybody who harms a protected member of my community, I will stand against them on the day of judgment as their arbiter. Meaning if you harm someone, you have God's prophet standing on the day of judgment with that person saying, God, I want him punished. That is a scary place to be. And so for Muslims for centuries, and that's what caused Abdul Qadir to stand up and say, let's fight to protect these. These are protected people. We're responsible for them in our lands. You have to remember, this is pre-modern. This is where religious minorities could be wiped out and nobody would bat an eye. Right? Conqueror just kills off the conquered. Right? That's why, you know, religious minorities didn't exist in many places. Right? And that was okay. That was accepted in pre-modern warfare. Here you have the prophet of God saying, if you harm a Christian or Jew in my nation, on the day of judgment, I will be his lawyer against you, speaking to God. So I hope you can sort of appreciate how difficult this is for us to see and how confused. I think we're more confused and bewildered than anyone else when we watch the news, right? And disgusted. But I promise you this isn't a fancy PR, right? We are telling you about our faith. We're telling you about our religion. And I would encourage people to get to know us before wanting to engage in debate, right? If somebody says, no, but I read this article and it said this, well, there's a time and place for debate, right? People do religious debates all the time. You go on YouTube and Google it. Atheist debates this and Jewish guy debates that. There's a time and place for that for those who are interested. I think can we sit down and get to know one another on our own terms? And I think that's very important. It's a very important thing because right now, caricatures of the other do us no justice. We're becoming more divided. We're becoming more polarized. I personally take slight issue, and I mean this with all due respect to the organizers, of this being framed in a post-inaugural sense. For me, as a country, we're becoming more polarized. I don't like that. I don't want to think of the other, one side is this and the other side is that. We're all in this together. And anybody I vehemently disagree with, I know that what I disagree with is in conclusion, but their desire for the welfare of this country and its people is the same as mine. And I don't have any sort of self-righteous, misconception that, oh, you must be a bad person. You must not love America unless you believe in this, and this. So let's get to know one another. Let's, grow together. And in our, e pluribus unum, right? Out of the many, out of our diversity is where our strength comes from. And thank you for allowing me to handle this spiel.
I think the other thing that we have to guard ourselves against as a nation is, when the country's blanketed by constant drumbeat of fear, right? It's ISIS, it's Osama bin Laden, it's China, or it's Russia, whatever the boogeyman is. It leads to intellectual paralysis. as a nation. And we have to guard ourselves against that. It is not the tradition of Jefferson. It is not the tradition of Washington. The Founding Fathers warned us against this insidious policy of fear. And you don't have to look far back in history to see what havoc that can wreak upon a people. Just like in World War II and World War I. So I think we have to really guard ourselves against this policy of fear and trapping us into intellectual paralysis. I think we need to continually ask critical, thoughtful questions and challenge our political leaders to conduct themselves in the most upright manner. And we have been asleep at the wheel as a nation. And from a military context, I'll just share with you a few. So when I graduated from the Naval Academy, we had foundational principles as a nation, one of which I shared with you, which is law of proportionality. If they hit us once, we'll hit them back once. Really hard, but once only, right? We prohibited torture. It's not okay. That we will act defensively. And that we will adopt the right of self-determination. That other nations have the right to determine their own political future. And the treatment of POWs. Our national security posture today is a complete reversal of those concepts. I already talked about proportionality, how we have responded in a fairly egregious manner. Torture is prohibited, but we know what happened. The evidence shows in Guantanamo Bay and other places we engaged in torture. That we will act defensively, but now we have a posture of preemptive strike. Because we think somebody may at some point attack us, we will attack them first. That is a standing national policy today, ladies and gentlemen. That's a fact. You can go read the national policy posture paper. It's point blank. We will act preemptively. If we think somebody's a threat, we will attack them first. That's a 180-degree reversal from what has guided our nation from World War II until today. Right of self-determination. We are actively engaged in nation building and regime change. We did it in Libya, we did it in Egypt, we did it in Iraq, we did it in Afghanistan in the past 10 years. So that's what we're doing. So there are repercussions to these reversals. We have been asleep at the wheel as a nation. So we all have to wake up and do our part as best we can. I mean, I've got a basketball game at 4:30 to take my boys, so I can't, I can only do what I can do, like you, but we must do our part. Anyways, one question I got here is, what scientific principle was spoken of by Muhammad? So, I'll share with you one. I was a navigator in the Navy, and there are certain mysteries of the ocean that are still perplexing today. For example, like how certain bodies of water don't intermingle from a salinity content, temperature, or pressure. It happens where the River Nile flows relatively fresh water for many nautical miles before turning brackish. In the eastern seaboard, where the cold water and the warm water stays relatively as such, creating massive weather disturbances. These are mysteries of the ocean that we're still trying to understand. It was written about 1,400 years ago by an Arab prophet who was illiterate, and it shocked me. So there are so many of these scientific things that I came across in the Quran and in the teachings. I thought, hey, that's evidence to me that revelation is ahead of scientific discovery. And it is describing the birth process and the list goes on. Seeing storms in the ocean where the waves are inside of waves. Unless you've been in the high seas, in that kind of storm, you have no idea what that guy was talking, what Prophet Muhammad was talking about. He said it, and he was a desert Bedouin, never seen the ocean in his life. So it was these types of things that kind of said, well, geez, there's something here. So that's what I meant by scientific discovery. I'll pass it on.
So one of the questions I got here is, would you follow Sharia law above the law of the United States? So one of the things I forgot to mention in my talk is that actually, according to Sharia law, you're required to follow the law of the land. So the Constitution is the highest law of the land here in the United States of America. So as Muslims, we're required to honor it and respect it and follow it. Islam does not believe in anarchy. So it believes in some system of government being in place, even if it's not a Muslim one, so that there's law and order. So the question, my answer would be yes and no. Yes, no, would you follow Sharia law above the law of the United States? So Sharia law for me is following the law of the land in the United States. If tomorrow, God forbid, there was a law that said you can't be Muslim, or you can't pray, you can't believe in one God, then if that meant that I had to go to jail for it, right now I feel, I would stand by my principles. So in that case, somebody may think, oh, she's valuing Sharia law over the United States. But hopefully we won't reach that point. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, one of the questions was, what resources would you recommend to an outsider who wants a fuller understanding of Sharia law and its application? There is a really great article, a very long article in the New York Times that if you Google it, written by Neil Postman. He's not Muslim, but it's in the New York Times.
It's in the New York Times.
So we're gonna Google it, but there was an article that had a brilliant understanding of Sharia law, and we were blown away by it because it was written by somebody who wasn't even Muslim, but had done their research and understood the nuances of it. Noah Feldman. So Noah, and then Feldman. You got that men part right?
Yeah.
Then Noah Feldman, Feldman. It's a long article, but it's worth reading. And then somebody had asked if I could just spell the terms I had used in my FAQ talk. So jihad is spelled Jihad. Hijab, the headscarf, is spelled Hijab. And Sharia is spelled Shariah. And I think that would be it. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to take on one more. Somebody asked, what today is the attitude toward the satanic verses? Those of us who were around in the 1980s, I remember when I was in high school, it was my senior year of high school, when the whole controversy about the satanic verses written by Salman Rushdie, and then there was that supposed fatwa by Ayatollah Khomeini saying that, he put a bounty on his head. That was the biggest issue I dealt with as a Muslim high school student, and it feels like such innocent times compared to what our kids are dealing with today. I don't think kids today or people today are thinking so much about the satanic verses anymore. After what we went through with all the controversies about the drawings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that made the satanic verses look like nothing. And during that time, I think the Muslims really were very introspective and really looked at ourselves and looked at our communities and had some deep conversations. And one of the things that comes out of everything we saw during that time, I think, should be an understanding about, first of all, how deeply revered and loved the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is. It's like if someone were to offend, your mother or your father in your presence. If you have a healthy relationship with your parents and you love them, it's something that would be very difficult to tolerate. And some people, lashed out in really unacceptable ways. And one of the things that I heard over and over from my teachers is that the violence that we saw in some different parts of the world was actually more offensive to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, than any caricatures that might have been made of him. Anyone can make any caricatures of him. That's what we've told our children. It doesn't matter. It's not him, right? It doesn't bring down his dignity in our eyes at all. If anything, it reveals the dignity of the people who waste their time trying to hurt people, trying to hurt one another. I remember when they had that Draw Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, competition in Texas. I think Pamela Geller organized it. My 11-year-old son said, "Isn't it ironic, Mama, that we couldn't try to get back at anybody by trying to draw something vulgar about Prophet Jesus?" because, we love him so much. And I said, well, no matter what religion it is, we wouldn't want to insult anybody that was loved by large groups of people. I'm going to take a break.
I have a question here. Reasons for homeschooling. Why can't keep yourselves apart? Homeschooling is a really big trend now. It's not just a religious thing. Many people are homeschooling for all sorts of reasons, and we have a homeschooling cooperative of 37 families who come together and teach the kids together, and there's lots of different reasons why we are together. Sometimes it's educational, sometimes it's oftentimes it can be religious reasons, but there's lots of different reasons. My original reason for starting to homeschool was more educational. I felt like I could teach my son better one-on-one than he could get in a school. But it did start to transform into religious reasons, especially as the society got more hostile towards Muslims. And as my husband and I are both converts, it's a big undertaking to try to raise our kids as Muslims, because we don't have extended family supporting us, and we don't have our communities supporting us. So it's a really big effort. So we have the opportunity to teach them what we want to teach them, and to raise them with the values that we want to raise them with, and give them that as their normal, at least until they're about 8th grade, and then most of them have gone to, it's a long story what the kids do in high school, but it's different things, and some have gone to public school. But we want them to have a strength of their morals and values, and just like most parents want for their kids. And if your morals and your values and what you're trying to teach is not supported by the culture around you, then sometimes you do have to separate yourself a bit. But we do a lot within the community. All my kids play sports. We have events all the time with our homeschooling co-op. We just had last week, they got together with the Jewish Day School and had some activities, and we do outreach events. So they're definitely involved, and they know that they're part of this community, and they love their community, and they want to be contributors. But in terms of raising a child, a parent does sometimes need to, keep them apart from a lot of other things in order to give them what they're trying to give them. So that's the one.
I remember reading a passage by Cicero. You'll recall that he was the political statesman in the Roman Empire. He said that you can tell the health of a society by paying attention to the stories they tell their children and observing the manner in which they treat their animals. And so when I look at the stories we tell our children through mass media, social media, Facebook, etc., the rates of pornography viewing by our boys and so on and so forth, it just depresses you, brings you to your knees, really. I remember as a kid growing up, watching TV, 8 is Enough, Brady Bunch. The raciest it got was like Dukes of Hazzards, right? Pretty innocent stuff. What our kids are exposed to on TV today, you really? The stories we tell our children is unacceptable. So, yeah, we are actively in the process. We try to shield our children and try to preserve their innocence one day longer. And if it takes everything out of us to do it, that's what we're going to do. And I think in the end, we as our children will be better off for it. They'll be more, contributing members of society and so on and so forth. So, we're cognizant of what's going on around us. And it was the stark contrast. We just came back from Africa, and West Africa is considered one of the poorest countries in the world. Mauritania, if you look at the State Department, it's like bottom 3. But they're rich in history, culture, tradition, values. So we're in the capital, totally safe, There's hardly any crime, petty crime at best, right? Can we say the same with all of our riches in our streets? Hardly any homeless in this supposedly poorest country in the world. So again, I think we have a lot of self-reflection to do, looking in the mirror to do for ourselves and for the benefit, and certainly for our children. So homeschooling is one of the ways in which to, create that environment.
Can I just add on to that? I'm sorry, I'm not one of the speakers, but there's plenty of Muslims in public school. My kids actually happen to go to a private Muslim school. But I mean, there's plenty of Muslims in public schools, and as any of you guys know who are parents, we're all just trying to do our best to protect our kids, their souls, their hearts, their bodies. We're just trying to protect them, and we're all just trying to do our best. There's no guarantee wherever we send our kids, you know, that anything's going to happen in the future. We don't know, right? But we're doing what we think is best for our kids, and that's what we expect anyone to do as parents.
I've got a quick add-on, and then I'm going to stop, I promise. It was a great question, and I'm not talking specifically to the person who asked the question, but I would love if from this conversation in this group, we start to see some of the implicit bias. There are countless Catholic schools, Jewish schools, there's tons of religious private schools, and we never stop for a moment and say, why are they separating themselves from society? And it's not blaming anyone here, right? But what has the media done to us where we really see Muslims? And it's easy, even for Muslims, you watch the news like, wow, those people, wait, I am those people. Like, whoa, I mean, you can really get lost in that narrative, but it's the them, not the we, right? It's they, it's not us, right? And we see them as another, right? Even though it's us. Maybe a small percentage of the population, maybe we don't get to see them and interact with them. But I would encourage us that after now you've sat with Muslims, this is actually pure result of history, that we all our kids all go to the same school, we did the panel together. The vast majority of Muslims, their kids are in public schools, etc. But it's very common for religious communities to provide private schooling for their children. And actually for high school, we're talking about putting our kids at Catholic school, different things like that. I think that's almost part of being an American, is you have your own sort of trajectory for how you try to preserve a subcommunity in terms of its a different narrative.
There was one question that got asked that is actually a very common question, so I think it's important to address it. Why do men not wear the hijab? Or wear hijab? So basically hijab means barrier. It doesn't actually mean headscarf. The Arabic word for headscarf is khimar. Hijab means a barrier that is there for protective purposes. And so for men also there is a dress code that's required of them, actually. People may just not be aware of it. Like, for example, I'm raising 3 sons, and so for men the understanding is that they cover from the navel to the knees. That part of the body always has to be covered. So whether they're going swimming or playing tennis, like my boys understand that they'll never wear shorts that will uncover their kneecaps. And also an understanding that of lowering the gaze from any, so like Mike mentioned, thank you. Mike mentioned, like, for example, pornography. Like, as a mother of 3 boys, I'm having to teach my kids about how to be safe on the internet and how to deal when they may come across an image or something may pop up that isn't appropriate. And so the way I've approached it spiritually with them is to remind them that part of their awareness of God is to lower the gaze and to not look at anybody's private parts and to not look at something that is meant for the private realm. And so for women, the parts of our body that we cover in Islam is everything but the hands, face, and feet. And for the men, they cover from the navel to the knees. And that's, we understand that to be from God's wisdom. He created men and women. He knows what our desires are and what is best for us. And so we just take it from there.
Sorry, one more thought on that. You can see what happens, right? The great thing about this panel is we spend a lot of time together. We've done this before, but everybody sets off a light bulb for someone else. So one of the things, and I really try to not speak about hijab because it's more of a hypothetical, theoretical thing for me. But I would encourage everyone to think about what kind of objectification of the female body marketing has done for us. And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, which definitely speaks to the dangers of that. And society does that in many different ways. And for Islam, it recognizes both a power and a there's a power in the female attractiveness that's just not there for men. I tip my hats to the ladies, right? But it can also be exploited. And this is one of the ways in which most Muslim women will tell you that they feel a sense of empowerment. I actually knew a woman who wasn't Muslim, and she was traveling in a Muslim country. Said she just wore the face cover, the head cover, and she eventually said, "I want to try the face cover." And she said, "I felt so in control of every conversation I was in." I just thought that was very interesting. But I think we need to be aware of society's tendency towards that as well, which is something that I think in our society as a whole, we have to unite and fight against that kind of objectification.
So the question is, what can we do to survive? What can we do to survive harmoniously in the next 4 years? Well, I mean, my view on that is, when I was transferring from one duty station to another, I had to drive 2 cars across the country. So I had to drive 1 car, fly back, and drive the other car back from Virginia Beach, Virginia to here. And it afforded me the opportunity to see this great land of ours. And, you have to make gas stops and talk to people. And I'll tell you what, it's a great country filled with great, good, decent people. That's a fact. And I don't think there's anything any one individual can do to change that. So I have faith in the good souls of this country, so, the people of this country.
Okay, so what can we do to survive harmoniously? Well, first of all, we should all pray. If we're part of faith communities, I really think that it's a time for prayer, a time for self-reflection, a time for turning towards God, and asking for His guidance and His help and His mercy. Also, I hope that we learn from history. One of the questions that we got asked is, do you think there could be any benefit in having a Muslim registry? And, based on history, I don't see good coming from that, from what we saw happen in Europe when there was a Jewish registry. And you don't need to put yellow stars on us. Many of us are identifiable as it is. The Japanese Americans, after 9/11, one of the first communities to reach out to us and ask us how we're doing and what do you need from us was the Japanese American community. It's very, very heartening and heartbreaking at the same time because they kind of got a sense of what might be coming. Also, I've been hearing about, unfortunately, I have been hearing about more and more Muslim women in particular, or men who look outwardly Muslim with the way they're dressed, being accosted in public. And one of the things that is standing out in a lot of the stories that are coming out is the silence of the people who are on the subways or, in the line at the grocery store where these things happen. So I think it's really going to be important for us to get out of our bubbles and to be willing to speak up when we do see injustice. And what we've been told in our training is really not to take on the person who's doing the attacking, but really to turn to the person who's being attacked and just make sure that they're okay. Ask them, what do you need from me? How can I help you? Let's walk away from here. So, just praying for each other, learning from history, and speaking up when we see injustices, and getting to know one another. I think this is a very great first step. And I know the questions were hard, but I actually wasn't so depressed by the questions because...
You're used to it, I think.
Yeah, one, I'm used to it, but two, I'm really grateful that people are willing to just put it out there and be like, okay, tell me, what do you got? As long as you're open to hearing and maybe having your mind changed, and by you, I don't mean you individually, I mean you collectively. And one of the things that gives me the most hope after these talks is when people come to me and say, I wish my neighbor was here, or my coworker was here, or my uncle who, goes off at the dinner table, or sends that nasty email to everyone. That gives me hope because that means people want to spread the message. Thank you.
I don't think I have much to add on what we can do to live harmoniously, because that's a really big question. But I did notice after the election, a lot of people were very fearful. Some Muslim women talked about taking off their hijab and trying to go undercover. And I had an opposite experience. I found that people were even more friendly, holding the door for me, smiling. Some people would come up and just have a conversation and apologize for what just happened and that Donald Trump was elected. And I feel like the good is coming. I feel like people are coming out of the woodworks to show their best side. So I see this as a good thing, and I'm looking forward to seeing the beauty of our country and our people shine in a way that it hasn't in a long time. I think this is what was needed to bring out the best in all of us. And my oldest son just got married last summer, and his family came from England. One of her uncles and aunts flew into the East Coast and drove across the country, and they were very worried how their experience would be as Muslims in America. And they arrived in California, and they said, this is the best country we've ever been in. The people were so nice, and it was a big surprise to them. So, and I wasn't surprised. So anyhow, just, we just all need to be the best we can and talk to each other, and that's the best we can do.
I am incredibly hopeful, actually. I would agree with Mike that even those who seem very belligerent and we're not using the term Islamophobic, I see them as well-intentioned people who have not had a chance to really understand and learn. And I sympathize with them because I think there is a lot of madness going on out there, and it is pretty easy to understand. So even the people that we think are ill-intentioned, I actually don't think that they are. And I think that there's hope that we can, through dialogue and getting to know one another. I would submit that the basis of this, there's a famous tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in which he taught us, and this is taught in every religion and every form, that none of you truly believes in God unless you love for your brother or sister what you love for yourself. And I think that if we can all go back to that golden rule, we've been being told that since we were 5 years old, it's a pretty hard one to implement. Right? That if we genuinely see something in our fellow American or fellow human being, that we still see their humanity and we wish good for them. There's an interesting linguistic observation that one of my teachers had, that in the word brother is the word other, right? And we have to see the brother in the other. And in Arabic, the word for other is akhar, and the word akh, the brother, is in there. So we have to see, when we see the other, we still see their humanity, we still see their innate goodness, and we still try to find ways to connect. And I think if we start from there, I don't think that there's any difference that we can't overcome. And I think that the most worrisome and concerning things are those that divide into us and them and they. And we can maintain our differences, but still see the humanity in one another.
So I started with some quotes from President Obama's farewell address. I'm going to end with one. It falls to each of us to be those anxious, jealous guardians of our democracy, embrace the joyous task we have been given to continually try to improve this great nation of ours. Because for all our outward differences, we in fact all share the same proud type, the most important office in a democracy, citizen. For me, you guys being here, all of us being here together, it's about making our country better. Like getting to know one another, trying to understand one another, understanding and embracing the diversity that is our country. It's so important, and we thank all of you for being here. I'd like to thank our speakers for taking their time, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking your time. And also, if you're interested in the Islam 101 session that's coming up on March 4th, I think there should be some flyers outside. Thank you so much.